Today we would be learning about gains from trade. So consider your typical day. You would wake up in the morning and you would probably have a coffee. The coffee was made by coffee beans that may have been grown in another country, such as Brazil. If you're a tea fan, you may pour yourself a tea which may have been made by tea leaves which were grown in a country like Sri Lanka. And then you would come to school, and if you drive to school, you may drive your car, which we all know that is made out of different parts made in different countries from the world. So every day we rely on people, most of whom we have never met, people from different countries of the world, to provide us with the goods and services we enjoy every day. So though we don't think much about it, we rely on these people. So such independence is possible because people trade with one another. So the reason for trade is people are better off when they specialize and trade with one another. So one of the 10 principles of microeconomics is trade makes everyone better off. So this is the reason why most economists support free trade and most of them oppose any trade restrictions. So in this lecture we will ask what are these gains of trade that the economists are very favorable of. So let's consider a model which simplifies the more complicated economy out there. So this is a very simple economy of just two goods. So there are only two goods in this economy, which is meat and potatoes, and there are only two individuals, who are a cattle rancher and a potato farmer. So this economy only has two goods and these two individuals. So in this exercise, we will be looking at how much of meat and potatoes each of these individuals will produce if the individual chooses to be self-sufficient, which means he or she would not engage in trade, and also we will look at how much goods they would produce if the individual decides to trade with one another. So first let's look at the farmer's production possibilities. Let's assume that the farmer has only 8 hours per day in total for production. And producing 1 ounce of meat requires 60 minutes. And producing 1 ounce of potato requires 15 minutes. So, if the farmer has 8 hours per day in total, how many ounces of meat can the farmer produce if he uses all 8 hours for the production of meat?
8 ounces?
8 ounces, right, correct. So how about for potatoes? If 1 ounce requires 15 minutes, in 8 hours, how many ounces of potato can the farmer produce? 32, right? Good. So, next, let's look at the rancher's production possibilities. So, the rancher also has 8 hours per day in total for production. And the rancher takes to produce 1 ounce of meat, the rancher requires 20 minutes. To produce 1 ounce of potato, he requires 10 minutes. So my question is again, in 8 hours, how many ounces of meat can the rancher produce?
24.
24, right. And how many ounces of potato can the rancher produce?
48. 48, yes.
Yeah, 48. Good. So, if one producer can produce a good using fewer inputs than another producer, then we would say that producer has an absolute advantage in the production of that good. So, as we saw before, the rancher takes 20 minutes to produce 1 ounce of meat, while the farmer takes 60 minutes. So can you tell me who has the absolute advantage in meat?
Rancher.
The rancher, right? He takes less amount of time to produce 1 ounce of meat. How about for potatoes? So the rancher takes 10 minutes for 1 ounce of potato, the farmer takes 15 minutes. Who has the absolute advantage in potatoes?
Again the rancher.
Again the rancher, right? So the rancher has absolute advantage in both goods. So if each producer has an absolute advantage in one good and specializes in that good, then both producers can gain from trade because each is good at that particular good. However, even if one producer has absolute advantage in producing both goods, like the example that I'm showing, still both producers can gain from trade. So we are going to see how. So this is the farmer's production possibility frontier. So in a previous lesson we have learned about the farmer's production possibility. So this curve, which is known as the PPF, shows various outputs that the farmer can produce using the resources he had. So if the farmer uses all 8 hours of meat, we know that the farmer can produce 8 ounces of meat, which is the point right there. If the farmer can allocate all 8 hours on potatoes, we know that the farmer can produce 32 ounces of potatoes. We calculated that before. So this line is called the PPF, which shows the maximum amount of production using the resources the farmer has. So the farmer can produce either at 8 or 32 or any other combination along the PPF curve. So before trade, so when the farmer is self-sufficient and does not trade, suppose the farmer decides to use half his or her time to produce each of the goods, then how many ounces of meat would he produce? 4, right? So all 8 hours on meat would give you 8, but half would give you 4 ounces of meat, right? And likewise for potatoes, if you only allocate half the time, you would only produce 16, right? So this is the rancher's production possibility frontier, and we calculated the amount of ounces that the rancher can produce if he uses all 8 hours on meat, which is 24, and if he uses all 8 hours on potatoes, which would give him 48 ounces. So if the rancher also decides to use half his time to produce each of the 2 goods, then he will produce 12 ounces of meat and 24 ounces of potatoes. So this is the amount of consumption the farmer and the rancher would have before engaging in trade, splitting the time that they have equally to both goods. So next, the farmer and the rancher decides that they would like to trade. So let's suppose that the farmer decides to trade and decides to produce 32 ounces of potato. If the farmer produced 32 ounces of potato, which is the dot right over there, how many ounces of meat can he produce with the remaining time? None, right? So his production would be 32 ounces of potato and 0 ounces of meat. Likewise, the rancher also decides to trade with the farmer and he decides that he will produce 12 ounces of potatoes. If the rancher produces 12 ounces of potato, how many ounces of meat can he produce with the remaining time? If 18, right? If you do the formal calculation, 8 hours equal 180 minutes. You minus the amount of time needed to produce 12 ounces of potato, and with the remaining time divide it by 20 minutes, which is the time that you take to produce 1 ounce of meat, which would give you 18. Is that clear? So this is the production both the farmer and rancher have just before trade. So the farmer has 0 meat production and 32 ounces of production for potatoes, and the rancher has 18 and 12. And this is how they decide to trade. The rancher is going to give 5 ounces of meat to the farmer in exchange for 15 ounces of potatoes. So after this exchange, how much meat can the farmer consume? 5, right? How much potato can the farmer consume? So, yeah, 32 minus 15, 17, right? So, if you do the calculation, how much the rancher would have for meat? 30, right? And for potatoes, the rancher would have 27 ounces of potatoes. So now we can compare the consumption before trade and after trade. And you can see that after trade, both the farmer and rancher has more consumption of meat and potatoes. So you could see previously it was 4 ounces, now it's 5 for the farmer. Previously it was 16 for potatoes, and now it's 17 for the farmer. And likewise, the rancher also has increased consumption. So if you show it on the PPF graph, that would be a point beyond the PPF graph, which was not previously achievable. With trade, the farmer was able to consume at a point beyond the PPF curve up there. And the farmer has gained 1 ounce of meat and 1 ounce of potatoes from trade. And likewise, the rancher has gained 1 ounce of meat and 3 ounces of potatoes after trade. So this example showed how trade made both the farmer and the rancher better off, even though the rancher had absolute advantage in both goods. So this example shows how countries and individuals can gain from trade even if they may not have absolute advantage in trade. So in the next lecture, we are going to study the concept of comparative advantage, which is the difference in opportunity cost, which is the reason behind the gains of trade even if one producer has absolute advantage over both goods. Thank you very much.